Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. Each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry. Now, today, we're lucky enough to have a remarkable guest joining us, Prescott Nasser, who is co-founder of SourceScrub. Hello, Prescott. Welcome to the podcast.
Very pleasure to be here.
How you doing today?
Pretty good for Monday. Can't complain. I'm in Tahoe, so it's starting to get a little colder. Might get a little snow soon.
Perfect. Sounds good. So firstly, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. And there's a lot of exciting things that we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and the company you work at?
About myself, loaded question. I'd say my background is technology. I'm a software engineer. That's where I started my journey. I've been doing that for about 25 years, mostly in startup kind of situations. I've done a couple of stints at some very large organizations that have subtly shifted my career path. I moved a little bit fintech in about 2008 and 9 with about 4 or 5 years at Charles Schwab. And so that kind of, but then right back into smaller startups where I think it's way more fun and a little bit faster moving, and then from tech and as a founder or co-founder, you kind of wear a lot of hats. So yeah, I started with product and tech, and as the company evolved and got bigger, I moved more towards kind of everything, right? You do little operations, you do finance, and then as co-CEO, reality is my purview kind of crossed. I got some sales and marketing in there, which nobody will call me a salesman, but I have some experience there too.
So you mentioned that you've worn a lot of hats. Are there any hats in particular that you like to wear?
That I like to wear. So I would say there's no particular hat I like to wear more than others. I'm really good at product and technology. I'm an engineer, right? I do that in my sleep kind of thing. But I'd say more of just I'm a process optimization data guy. And it really it's cross-functional, right? You talk about sales organizations, and it's like, okay, what's our process for a sales organization? How are we managing inbound leads, outbound leads? How are we retargeting, and what's the right strategy? And that dovetails into like pricing and packaging. How do we price our product right? And it's all sort of data-driven, and it's all kind of process-oriented with, where do you start and then where do you go from there that makes it repeatable so that anybody can adapt to it and anybody can kind of just, okay, here's the process, go, especially as you scale. So it's tough to answer that question.
So how did you actually end up starting SourceScrub?
Yeah, so SourceScrub, my co-founder at SourceScrub, I've known him since probably Little League baseball, like 10, 11, something like that. We went to middle school together. We did high school. They kind of lose track during college, and everybody goes their own way. And I randomly ran into him on public transportation in San Francisco, and he started pitching me on SourceScrub. And it really came out of a process that he was doing at private equity, and he saw an opportunity to kind of just create it and repeat that for every other private equity shop, if you will, any other investor. So we started talking. At that point, I don't know how many years into technology and building products, and I had the financial services kind of pivot. And so I kind of had an understanding of the pieces of the puzzle. And from there, it was just him pitching me and convincing me that it was a good idea. One of the challenges with being the tech guy, and I was the tech guy at a young age, is everybody has a tech idea. Everybody's like, I got the greatest idea ever. It's going to make us a fortune. And I got some really fine-tuned skepticism for any idea that comes at me. And, but the things that worked were he was working in an organization, doing the process already, felt the pain point. They bought into it, actually, the idea and the company idea, and then he was all in. And it wasn't like I'm going to do it, he's going to do it part-time while having a job, and I'm going to build all the tech for him while he, is doing his day job. It was he quit. He was all in, and ultimately convinced me the idea was worth it.
So being an entrepreneur, was that something that you always thought that you would be, or was it something that you just happened upon?
Happened upon. I mean, I think that even in high school, actually in middle school, I was working with friends. We were building websites for people. We were just, I mean, it was like your standard kind of like 90s hacker ethos of you just like tinkering with stuff. And for us, it was really the web was kind of getting started. And so we spent a lot of time playing with websites, building that stuff. And it was mostly just, would anybody pay us to do anything? And some of it actually was the reverse, where it was like it was a really interesting story. So in high school, I don't know if it's normal of all high schools, but our high school had a lot of bands. Everybody was creating a band, and they all needed a band website. Everybody wanted, so we ended up building a lot of band websites for people. And so we ended up like getting work just intuitively because we were the web guys. And it kind of just built off of that, like tinkering, like building things. And then later it was just because of the like many hats thing. What I found at larger organizations is there's not that opportunity, and there's just a lot more structure that built up for really good reasons in a big organization, but frustrating for someone who wants to move a little faster, be a little more flexible, and just kind of solve problems versus getting through organizational craft.
So you and your co-founders, it's just one co-founder.
Yeah.
So do you both have the same skill sets, or do you complement each other's strengths and weaknesses?
We complement really well. I've there's a lot of ways I've discussed our relationship and our strengths. So his background, private equity, investment analysis, phenomenal like sales and relationship building, right? He's the guy that's like, he'll remember you 10 years later because you guys had one beer or one conversation. I struggle to remember people that I spend hours with that was, 6 months ago. Like, I just don't have the memory, and that's not my motion, right? And so he's really strong go to market, and I was really strong back office operations. That's how we started. But he's also a little bit more confident taking, I'm a founder, I take risks, but I describe us as he runs out ahead of me with risks and I follow up behind him. And so there's a little bit of a push-pull with us where he may take on risks that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, but I'll sometimes slow him down from taking risks that are too far out. And it worked out really well for us, and it just was just phenomenal.
So if someone was starting their own business, or they're looking to be an entrepreneur, would you say that it's a good idea to work with friends, or would you advise against it?
I've never had a problem working with friends. We'll talk about hobbies and other things later where we'll make more sense. But for me, it's never been a problem. It's we have a way of doing business, and I would say I'm lucky in that the people I've worked with were also business minded and had a goal of building something successful, and were reasonable in their approaches, right? Like there's always a give or take, and especially for co-founders, like trying to figure out or understand the balance of that. I don't have a playbook for it. It just came naturally to us, but for me, it's never been a problem.
Perfect. So you mentioned hobbies, and why not discuss hobbies then? Because it'll give broader context to the situation. So let's discuss what do you do as hobbies?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. So I'm a workaholic. I like working. I like solving problems. I don't. We talk. I'm a perfect example of do what I say, not what I do, because I don't have a lot of obligations. I don't have kids. I have a girlfriend, but she's easygoing and she's got her own life, and so it's not. I have more free time is the way I'd put it. I like to work, and so I work weekends, I work nights, I work too many hours, and I try to get people not to do that. But what ended up happening to me is I ended up doing multiple things. Before I co-founded SourceScrub, I still am an investment banker, which is the fintech aspect. So I was doing investment banking, started SourceScrub, and then 2 years later started another company called 280 Capital Markets, which was a bond trading, fixed income trading platform. And that company, oddly enough, we sold it / merged with another company a couple of years ago. I stayed on as a co-founder, CTO for a while, and then I ended up leaving right before I left SourceScrub in an operating role, so just a board member now. And so the short answer is I went from many jobs to just juggling things, right? And juggling all the hats that a company has: sales, marketing, tech, product, legal in some sense. I went from that to nothing really fast, right? So in November of last year, I did 18 months in the merger to make sure the merger worked fine, worked great. I left that, and then we had found an operator at SourceScrub, who our sponsor Francisco had worked with before, and they're like, "Hey, this is a great guy." We knew we wouldn't be there for the next turn because we had started the company, founded it. We went through one recap with one private equity group. This was the second one. We're like, "Hey, we've done our part. Like, you got to figure out for the next move, you got to figure out what you want to do." And so we knew that was going to happen at some point. We just didn't know when. And they came again quickly with like, "Hey, we got a guy. He's free. It's the start of a year. It makes sense to bring him on so that he can have his fingers on the plan." All makes a ton of sense. Like, great. And so I went from, multiple jobs to nothing, basically. I do some consulting and advising, but not the day job anymore. So I don't have a lot of hobbies. I'm reading a little bit. When ski season starts, I'll do some skiing. But those are pretty low key hobbies compared to like a daily activity.
So you describe yourself as a workaholic, but no one can work all the time. So what do you do in your free time? And do you actually create that zone of work and life?
So there's no boundaries on my time, right? It's not like, it's 5:00, I got to take time off. I don't do that. I read. I like to read. I'm been reading too much these days, but I like to read. I'm trying to get back into that a little more. Again, the one-off, like a ski trip kind of thing. Now I live in Tahoe. It's just a day trip or a couple hour trip, as you will. A lot of one-off things, but there's no. I watch a lot of TV. I love TV, but mostly it's on in the background, right? It's on the background while I'm coding or doing other things. And so I consume a lot of TV with kind of like a small portion of my brain that the TV's over here.
I think we're all guilty of doing that, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you fortunate enough to actually your work to actually be your hobby because you enjoy it so much that you don't need that relaxation from it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I find work enjoyable. I also am super fortunate in that I, as a founder, co-founder, get to do what I want, and it makes doing some of the things that you have to do a lot easier, knowing that like, all right, I've done at one of the companies, we're a data info services company. So I know all about data, and, we're building AI machine learning stuff. We had to build label data sets. I'm sitting with a spreadsheet with 10,000 rows that I'm just labeling manually data. And it's like, I don't have to do it every day. Right. But, help in, step out step in, help out the team. It makes it easier to do that. And also that's only part of the job, right? The rest of the job is they get to bounce from role to role, kind of advising, helping, finance 1 minute, HR the next minute. And I like the variety, and it keeps it fresh and interesting. It's not the same problem, every second of my day. It's different problems all day long.
Do you work more effectively at certain times than others? Like, are you something of a morning person or an evening person?
So I would say I'm an evening person. So SourceScrub, when we started, we had a Ukrainian engineering group. So it was me as the only person onshore. I was head of product, architecture, CTO, pick all those titles. The only person onshore, and everybody was offshore. So we'd have like 15 to 20 people in Ukraine. And I usually would work from like 11 to 2 or 3 in the morning. And then I'd usually be up around 7-ish to kind of start again. And that got me like a ton of overlap with Ukraine. And so I did that for a while. I did that for 7 years, actually. And somewhere in the mix, we ended up shifting Ukraine to morning hours. That started at like 5. This was near the end for me. So I don't have to do this as much as others, but they started doing like 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m. meetings. And then we had a group in Philippines. And so Philippines started about 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And so like for a few of us that had to be on both team meetings, it was very early morning. And then, you'd have the day job, and then you'd have the night job of the other part of the world.
So no sleep for you then.
No, yeah, I'm getting better at getting regular sleep, about 6 hours these days. Probably when I was in it was probably like 4 hours or less, which wasn't great, but I don't know. I enjoyed it. I get very snarky when I have very little sleep. I get my wit gets real quick and real sharp, which is sometimes fun and other times not great.
I think we're all guilty of the same thing with lack of sleep. We all can understand you from that perspective. So in terms of like managing offshore versus managing onshore, is it a different style of management, and do you have a preference for one over the other?
Yeah, definitely different style of management, and depends too on whether you're, I've worked totally offshore, I've worked totally onshore, and I've worked a mix. And they're all a little different. My preference is always to treat everybody as a team member, whether they're a contract or not. They're a team member, and so they get treated the same way, more or less. Outside of the legal contractual pieces of it, but they're part of the team. And so they're, an engineer that's a contract engineer offshore is zero different from an engineer who's onshore, who's W-2 employee. They're 100% the same to me. The biggest thing I think really with offshore is really just thinking about the time shifting. And, it's a lot of work. And especially for us where the majority was in Ukraine, 15-to-1 ratio, something like that. Like, I'm the one time shifting, right? Like I have to do it. And, you have to make the time. And I made a lot of time to do it versus folks that are like, oh, we cross over like an hour or two in the morning or something like that. It's like, that's not the same. I would have 3 or 4 hour conversations where I'm sure you're familiar, like you get in a call with someone and you don't necessarily have a strict agenda and you just start wandering, right? Talk about random stuff, architecture, personal life, whatever. Middle of the night for me, right? It could be 3 or 4 hour meeting. And all of a sudden it's 4 or 5 in the morning. And I'm like, well, this was just team building, right? All it was team and relationship building. And I think that's a part that gets missed for a lot of people that do offshore is making sure you build the relationship. And I have 2 very specific examples of working with onshore and offshore, and where they're together. I can't stress how much of a difference I see in the team when they meet in person. And it doesn't have to be like crazy productive, right? We used to go to Ukraine 2-3 times a year. And the first time we went this is at the other company, where that company was primarily onshore. And then we added offshore resources. And, so we didn't go to Ukraine as a team for about 1.5 years, just because it wasn't in the budgets to send a couple of people. Because, again, we had a bigger onshore than offshore team. And so we ended up it took like 1.5 years, but night and day from kind of how the teams talk to each other and treat each other to, okay, now you spent a week with them. We did breakfast, we did lunch, we did dinner, we did drinks. We got kind of enmeshed in the culture a little bit. Like you come out of that and it just seems like there's a heck of a lot more empathy and understanding. And it was night and day. And so that my philosophy continues on that, which is like in person is great. I'm not advocating for return to office stuff, not that, but meeting everybody and spending time outside of just, these are the tickets, this is the work. It just seems to be a lot of social like oil, if you will, to kind of help things just fit together nicely and work together nicely. And that's the one thing I would say. Anybody doing anything offshore where it's not just a small little project based, right? If you got continuous offshore teams, meeting is so valuable, so valuable.
Talking about meetings and team members, like what kind of qualities are you looking for in people who want to be in your company or team?
Oh man. Outside of the specifics of like the role, right? So we're a fintech company, financial services is mighty helpful to understand. Outside of those specifics, look for, I guess, maybe two things: people that are inquisitive. And nobody knows everything. I don't know. I've probably forgotten more than I know at this point. And so just continuing to evolve yourself and your understanding of what you do. So as I think of like engineers, keeping up on whatever language that you happen to be working in and keeping abreast of changes and new things and just reading about, the blog posts and other things. I think that's incredible. It tells me something about kind of your interest in your craft. And then I think the other thing is just people that are open to new ideas. I love to argue. I love to argue just to argue. Sometimes I'll play devil's advocate just because I have a bad habit of doing it. And it's really to try to get to the best idea. It's not about you're right, I'm right, you're wrong. Maybe I don't understand, and trying to understand by poking holes, right? And so I you got to be open to alternative solutions and open to new ideas, and trying to find people like that is very hard in an interview process. But once they're on the team, you can see it in action a lot easier for folks that are like, all right, let's discuss the direction we're going and why yes or no, and let's hear the pros and cons, and then either adjust appropriately or sometimes it's just admitting and saying, I actually don't know. You could be right, but let's go this way for now and see what plays out. I'm like, that's cool. That's fine. Right. I have no problem with that.
So we talked a little bit about yourself and what kind of qualities you have in team members. What if you would describe yourself in 3 words? What words would you use to describe yourself?
Yeah,
this is the question that everyone hates.
yeah. Can we query my colleagues and friends real quick? Describe. I would say.
I think you said practical was one of them, right? You're quite realistic and you like people to be grounded. So maybe you're kind of grounded in reality based on what you've said.
Yeah, I'd say practical, maybe logical is maybe, a similar-ish term to that. I think I'm pretty approachable. I generally like to foster, I do tons of skip levels, and I used to have a standing coffee hour on Fridays, and anybody shows up, and man, those got wild because you get anybody in that call from top to bottom of the organization. And I just encourage, like, it didn't have to be about work. So I encouraged all kinds of random stuff, and it got wild, but it was fun. So approachable, I think, a fast learner.
Easy to talk to, approachable, I think.
Yeah, I think that once you know me, some people I didn't appreciate how much like titles influence things. I still don't, by the way. And anybody who's report to me who's going to watch this is going to be like, he's like, yeah, he hates that. He doesn't care at all about titles, but they're really important. And I'm going to admit a little bit, they're a little bit important. I never cared about titles, but more importantly, I never really appreciated, or it took a while to appreciate like the wow factor of, oh my God, I'm meeting the co-founder. See, it's like, I'm just a normal dude, and that's,
we got that down to earth.
We got to like 900 people at SourceScrub as an operator. And some of those people got just, I worked really hard to not be this dude way up on the totem pole that was like awe inspiring, just luck of the draw that I'm at the top here and you're not. And
I think there's a lot of modesty there. Maybe we can add
luck of the draw
as well. There, right? If we look back at your life, what would be the biggest learn for you that you've had, or the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome?
I would say that not in any one thing, but the biggest challenge I always have are people problems. they're not solvable in the same way that like a technical challenge is, right? Or a sales funnel. Like it's not logical, right? A lot of people problems aren't logical. And or they're just, you and I, Barry, have different worldviews, right? And we can both see the same thing and interpret it very differently. And sometimes that creates explosions where they don't need to exist, right? Or sometimes you work with all different manner of people, and some are less willing to bend their worldview or accept that there are other worldviews, and now you got a problem between two people that's like didn't have to exist. And so a lot of it's that, and that I don't think is ever going to change. I'm never going to find that easier. Everything else is easy. Technical problems we can solve, whatever. No, I don't think there's been any one big like hurdle in life. I do too much reading, but there's a couple of like the comics of the how people see the path of like a founder, and it's like, oh, here's them being this road to path success, and there's one that's like it's basically like a ball of yarn, it's all over the place, and it's like, yeah, it's more like that. It's just constantly adapting to new problems and new issues that come up, and constantly dealing with failing in a lot of different ways. And the ultimate trajectory, obviously, I can look backwards and say did pretty well. But in the moment, there were a lot of places where we didn't think we'd make it, or we actually had a bad time, that you just kind of got to keep pushing through. I don't know. No one like make or break moment that I could point to, or one big hurdle where it's like, all right, I got to the top of the hill and now it's all downhill coasting. I'll let you know.
It's nice to be in that position.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I like a lot.
Maybe in 10 years' time, we'll ask you the same question. You might answer differently.
Great. That's my goal is 10 years' time, actually.
Are you a creative person?
Am I a creative person? In a way, in a sort, right? I'm not like artistic. I'm not going to write a book. I'd like to say I'm a problem solver, and in that space, like you talk about technology, architecture, financial engineering, from my investment banking background. Like, yeah, I can be very, very creative to solve problems in those space. Yeah.
Perfect. That was a bit of a loaded question, because the next question is going to involve some creativity.
Great.
So if you were to think of a movie poster for your company, what kind of imagery would you use, and what kind of slogans or catchphrases would be on that poster?
That depends on what I want the focus to be. So sometimes the image I have in my head when it gets really crazy is just imagine holding like just like a chaotic, like an atom, or blown up in size, where you're holding your hand. It's just chaos, right? It's just like chaos. And as a founder CEO, I'm just like trying to hold this chaos together, and it's just like exploding all over as I'm trying to keep it. And so that, that's my self-important image that sometimes I'll go with in my head. I just imagine like managing this chaos of this company. That's in my head. Doesn't really go anywhere else out of there. I generally look at putting like the team in front, and so you might look at some of our leaders some have been there a long time. And some of them have grown phenomenally, and watching their paths. But I'm a superhero fan, so take an Avengers, kind of poster, put the guys up there, put the team up there. It's about the team. That's really the journey. I mean, at this point, I like doing what I do because I like building things, but I like working with people that are also building things. Couldn't do it solo. I wouldn't want to do it solo. And so it's really about the people. And that's my favorite part these days, is really helping others grow in their own careers.
That's a nice answer. I like it. That was a great answer. I love it. And you mentioned superheroes, which is great, because my next question is going to be, if there was any major problem in the world that you were capable of solving and you had the resources to solve, what would you solve and why?
If there was a problem in the world I was capable, I'm generally an optimist. I'm pretty optimistic. Like I know climate change is a is a problem. I feel optimistic that through advancements in technology and other things, we'll figure it out as a species. Might be rough, it's like the founder's path. It's going to be all over the freaking place. But, at the end of the day, I'm an optimist that it will look like success, and anybody looking back will be like, you made it look easy, and so climate change is one. I think that another thing that's maybe more close to my heart is financial literacy. I'm part of that is really just finances in general, a lot of poverty in the world. And so the financial literacy is probably more focused less on the direct poverty aspect. You got to have money to do any literacy, but helping people understand finance, I think there's a lack of education. And, outside of that, I like some of the stuff that the Gates Foundation is doing with eradicating diseases. I mean, I think a lot of it is political these days, seemingly more than necessarily financial or technology, biology, chemistry kind of thing. It's actually getting vaccines to the people that need it, and the U.S. politics aside on that, globally it gets really hard in countries like Africa and other places where very big, very diverse, don't have infrastructure. I don't know. I like those problems.
Do you think it's important for companies to stay politically neutral or to avoid politics? Or do you think it's something that companies should involve themselves in?
I kind of go all over the place, right? I like to be neutral, as a company, because the reality is as a company, we represent a lot of people, right? We have a lot of employees with us that represent very diverse views, and do my best to try to. There's the PC answer, just I'm going to be on a losing side of an argument regardless of what I do, right? There's going to be a group of people that don't like my answer, and I'd rather not wade into it, right? I'm trying to build my business, right? We're trying to do whatever we're trying to do, and at a certain level, that's really what, let's just focus on that. I can't solve any of the world's problems. SourceScrub was not big enough. We're not a Microsoft or an Apple who may, who at their size probably have way more clout, so to speak, and also way more, people who are going to hit them from either side. So I'm not a fan of wading into it as a business. I'd say we try to do things right by our employees. So financial literacy, we do education internally. Philippines was interesting because when we started, they couldn't get bank cards without 2 months pay in the bank, which most of them don't have. And so we sponsored them as a company, right? And so hopefully nobody's going to have a problem with, the financial literacy. That's a safe one, right? We sponsored, vaccines in Philippines, where for them it was much harder to get. It wasn't forced, but made it available and did our part. But yeah, I try to stay out of it. It's not a winning strategy.
I can imagine. So we are coming towards the end of the session, unfortunately. But before we end, I do like to ask one question, same question for everyone, really. So imagine there's someone watching this podcast now and they feel the entrepreneurial bug. They want to do something, they have some ideas, but they're a little bit hesitant about doing it, or some fear is holding them back. What advice would you give to those people?
There's a lot of competing concerns, and primary amongst them is, how am I going to continue to live if I go jump and do a startup? And I think that is a hard hurdle to get over that some people don't ever get over, and some people are just I like the comfort. I have ideas, I'd love to do it, but I also get a nice paycheck, and I'm prioritizing other parts of my life. And I think it's difficult to finally decide how much comfort do you need to jump all in. And in a lot of cases, I'd say I never jumped all in. I always had multiple hats, right? From banking, from starting in investment banking to doing tech, I ended up with 3 jobs at one point. And so I never really jumped all in, but I sacrificed the rest of my life for that. I sacrificed all of my time into it, and that was the choice I made, but it gave me it gave me a lot of buffer for if it failed, I had this other job. And so there's no answer. There's no right answer here, right? You're going to have to figure out at what point do you feel like you've got enough to either jump in, or are there ways to tiptoe in, dip your toe in, so to speak, and try to get more traction and more comfort that this is going to work or not. And that only works for some ideas. Like, I couldn't imagine doing that for some of the harder startup problems. Not that SourceScrub isn't hard in the grand scheme of things, right? It's not a science-backed company. It wasn't expensive to start, relatively speaking, right? It didn't cost us millions of dollars of startup costs, kind of thing, to even get going. And that's not true for a lot of ideas. And I wouldn't pressure anybody to jump into it, if they're not ready for it. If you're not ready to jump into it, you're not ready to jump into it. It's that easy.
And that answer was totally in line with the previous comments you said about you being more reserved and not wanting to take risks. So it's brilliant that you gave that answer. So thank you very much for that. So Prescott, I just want to thank you again for talking with us today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, likewise, Barry. It was really enjoyable.
That was Prescott Nasser, co-founder of SourceScrub.